Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 19th annual Martin Luther King Day lecture. I realize that it is not, Martin Luther King Day anymore, but as you know, our schedule here at Brown often prevents us from having these special events when our students are on break. And so we're delighted that you are here this evening to pay tribute to the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is a quote from our keynote speaker. In today's sharp sparkle, this winter air, anything can be made, any sentence begun. On the brink, on the brim, on the cusp, praise song for walking forward in that light. We honor Dr. King today by coming together in the hopes of building a beloved community. And now more than ever, we need to build this beloved community. And so in that spirit, I would ask that if you could take a moment to notice who is here present today to help us build that community by greeting the person next to you, or the person behind you, or in front of you, and introducing yourself. Thank you very much. My name is Lisa Cariagalo. I'm the Vice President for Academic Development, Diversity, and Inclusion here at Brown. And I'm so delighted that you are here with us present for not just this very special moment to honor Dr. King's legacy, but also present for each other and for our speaker who came up from New York. And we'll be heading down very quickly to back home, but we are so honored to have her here, and she will be introduced shortly. But before that, I want to say how important it is for us to gather in this beloved community, to be reminded every year of what community means to each of us. And each year, during this celebration, we invite a special musical selection by one of our wonderful singers. And as we did last year, we have invited our wonderful Harmonizing Grace to provide a musical selection. So please give a warm welcome to Harmonizing Grace.
Good evening, everyone. We are Harmonizing Grace, a gospel choir founded on Brown's campus in 2013, and it is our honor and delight to be here with you this evening to sing a couple of selections, so we hope that you are blessed and enjoy them.
Okay, sure. My name is Judy. I am a first-year medical student here at Brown. I actually went to Brown undergraduate for my 4 years, so here for another 4 years.
Hi everyone, I'm Shelly Ann, or Shelly for short. I went to UMass Amherst for my undergrad, and I'm doing a master's program in biotech. I'm now in my second year.
Hi, I'm Eliza. I'm a first year at Brown, and I have no idea what I want to study yet, but maybe English.
Hello everyone, my name is Osha. I studied English and Education Policy and graduated class 2016. I'm deferring a Master's in Urban Ed Policy here at Brown.
Hi, my name is Nancy. I am also a first year here at Brown, and I plan to concentrate in cognitive neuroscience.
Hi, I'm Patience. I'm a first year and I'm planning on concentrating in political science.
Right. My name is Joy. I'm a second year student and I'm studying biomedical engineering here at Brown.
My name is Yuyeon. You guys can call me Tina. I'm a sophomore and I'm planning to study computer science.
My name is Emily. I'm also a sophomore and I'm studying electrical engineering.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm a first year and I'm planning on concentrating in biology.
Cry.
Thank you, Harmonizing Grace, for the bright light of your music, but also the way in which you live each day here at Brown in service to all the great work that you do, both in the classroom and outside. So thank you, and thank you for making the time to come here this evening. As Dr. King has always said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And part of what being part of a beloved community means is that we all have the birthright of ensuring that we all are indeed ensuring that justice is everywhere in which we live, whether that's in the classroom, whether it's here in the interactions that we have with one another, whether it's in the community doing the work that we need to do to build up our communities. There's no one here at Brown, I think, that does this so seamlessly as the introducer of our speaker. Professor Tricia Rose is someone who needs no introduction to this community, but she is someone whose work in the scholarly community, in the larger communities in which we live, certainly globally, provides for us the kind of light and vision that Dr. King imagined for the beloved community. So please join me in welcoming Professor Tricia Rose to the podium.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are you? Good. It's really great to see you all here. I was in the front. I didn't see all the filling out. That's wonderful. And I also want to thank Harmonizing Grace. I think some of them may still be here. If there's anything you will get out of tonight, it'll be about the balm of community in creative spirit. And so it's a beautiful opening to Professor Alexander's speech. Well, let me say that I always love introducing people for Martin King Day because it's one of my favorite holidays. It's one of my favorite opportunities to hear from people about community and activism and resilience. But this year's a little extra super duper special. Because I've known Elizabeth Alexander. I just did the math, which means I did this. Should we even say? Yeah, it's over 30 years I've known Elizabeth. We were college roommates. Insane, which was not recently, I can say. But more importantly, she's a dear friend who's an extraordinary artist, thinker, and visionary about the world. I'm going to just read a couple of things here because I don't want there to be too much time before you get to hear from her yourself. She's an accomplished poet, an essayist, a teacher, and the author of 6 books of poems, 2 collections of essays, a play, and various edited collections. She was just named the Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and is the Won Sum Tam Mellon Professor of the Humanities at Columbia University, and for the past year or so has been the Director of the Creativity and Free Expression Unit at the Ford Foundation. She was previously at Yale, where she taught for 15 years and chaired the African American Studies Department. And for those of you who recall the extraordinary inauguration of President Obama in 2009, she composed and delivered Praise Song for the Day, which was an extraordinary poem. But my favorite thing about her is her moving and just extraordinary memoir, really, The Light of the World, which was released not too long ago to great acclaim. Elizabeth writes and lives with just miraculous grace and insight, and we're really lucky to have her here at Brown. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. I love being in your space. Thank you for bringing me. It's wonderful to be back in the same space together. And thank you, voices, beautiful voices, some still over here. It was a wonderful way to start things. And I'm glad to be with all of you tonight. It is wonderful to be with you and to see some faces with other familiar long ties. Sometimes, okay, I'll just say it, sometimes your students become professors and great professors. So hello, Professor Murray, it's nice to see you after a long time. So I have a lot of ideas and thoughts that I want to share with you tonight. So I am going to give you a lot, and then we're going to have a conversation. And the title of this talk is Total Life is What We Need, Self-Determination and Black Arts Collectives in Honor of Dr. King. And that's a springboard. 1, don't forget to feed the Loas. When I was growing up, there was no King holiday to celebrate. It's still a happy measure of progress for me that this day is a national holiday, even though many fought and fight to keep that from happening. Of course, for a piece of my growing up, there was Dr. King himself, and I thank my parents for everything, but in particular for now, for taking me in 1963 to the March on Washington in a baby carriage, because there was no question in their mind that they should go, and no question in their mind that the baby should be there as well, though neither of them could know in advance how that day would live in our history. In remembering the march, my parents always tell me 2 things. 1, that though we remember Dr. King's astonishing speech, its unforgettable language and powers of analysis, its rhetoric, its invitation to the audience and audiences for years to come in the call and response of its construction, its tough challenges, its sheer beauty. The march was not just about Dr. King and that speech. It was organized by, as you know, in large part by A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. There were women doing the foot soldier work, as throughout the civil rights movement. There are women who were supposed to speak, who were not allowed to speak. There were extraordinary measures taken, pre-fax, pre-cell phone, pre-Twitter, to organize all of those people peacefully and productively in one place. It was a small miracle to have pulled it off, even in its imperfections. And so progress goes, the work of communities of many, sometimes exemplified by the charismatic one who helps deliver the message. In my home growing up, we had a small candy dish on a shelf in our family room, and that dish was filled not with candy, but with buttons, political buttons from various sites and causes. There was a campaign button for the first Black candidate to run for mayor in Mississippi. There was a Si se puede, yes we can button from Cesar Chavez's United Farm Workers Movement. And there was a button from that March on Washington, a button which my father wore to Barack Obama's first inaugural 46 years later, an image of a black hand shaking a white hand and the words, jobs and freedom. In the midst of the soaring rhetoric we all remember, the purpose of that march, after all, was to seek equal opportunity in employment, with the understanding that once those barriers were removed, once everyone had a fairer shake to have a job with which to support themselves and their families and find purpose in the day and move through life with the dignity that self-reliance confers, that so much else could follow. That is an unfinished struggle. Dr. King spoke of love as an ethic, the necessary guiding force in our lives, and I feel that is more important with every nanosecond that passes. I am so inspired by his notion of beloved community. Yes, we know what love is on a level. I love you, you love me, we love our children, we feel it in our hearts, it feels good. But what about the harder kind of love that also guides us and that takes up much more space, frankly, and spurs us to difficult action? What about the love that makes us say, I think you are wrong and this is why? I think you are hurting yourself and I want to help you stop. What about the love of country that made a Martin Luther King say to the highest powers in the land, you are denying us justice and we demand it? Or the love of country that would make us protest against a war or a newly inaugurated president who takes our precious lives, and I'll say more about that later, and takes resources which could be put to other ends and squanders them. It is love that makes us say, we can do better. We expect better, we deserve better, we will struggle until we have better. It is love for our communities that makes us hold each other to high standards and ask and expect the best of each other. It is love for ourselves that makes us honor our own temples, the ones we live in, the ones we are fully responsible for, so that we can be nourished, strong, healthy, clear thinking, ready to rumble. So I'm trying to talk about the kind of love that takes work, but that moves us toward that better way that still eludes us years after Dr. King gave us so much to be inspired by. I see love made manifest and powerful in the space of Black creative communities, collectives. And in the African American tradition, our communities, our creative communities, include the dead. I'm going to say more about this. Moving back and forth across the line of the living and the dead, bringing everyone into the room who is not present in body, as we now bring the legacy of Dr. King into the room. What do I mean by that? I believe that the fundamental and underlying and always present fact of Black vulnerability and proximity to death since we first set foot on these shores has created an artistic and communal response, has created in artistic and communal response a powerful ethic best embodied by the phrase, every shut-eye ain't asleep, every goodbye ain't gone. There is but a porous scrim between life and death, so we bring everyone into the room who is not here. We are always tribe, we are always community. Black art eulogizes, remembers, makes ancestral reference. So I'm interested in this art which speaks with intimate proximity to death and the ancestral imperative in Black culture. Don't forget to feed the loas is an entreaty or opening salvo, a refrain in Ishmael Reed's great novel Mumbo Jumbo, where he articulates the imperative to remember to honor the deity-like ancestral forces that guide us through our contemporary lives. The offerings on their altars may be fruit or flowers, chicken or wine. When taken metaphorically, offerings may also be found in the form of art and the calling of names to honor our dead and keep them near as we need them. I want to open up the idea of feeding that source in our art making, and I want to exalt poetry, especially today, for its unique ability to embody the transtemporal self and carry voices vividly across time. I also want to interrupt the idea of the preciousness of the genre of poetry. I myself have subscribed to that from time to time in fits of self-satisfaction, but coming face to face with death reminds me profoundly that poems per se are not the point. What ancestral forces those poems call forward is the point. We exist on a continuum. Our communities are here in the room, here in larger circles, here on the present in a larger circle, but also brought forward ancestrally. Not a house in the country ain't packed to its rafters with some dead Negro's grief. I know many of you recognize that from beloved Toni Morrison, and I'm interested in the creative manifestations of that ineluctable fact. That's what I continue to find interesting, and that's where I like to work at the juncture of spirit and intellect. The springboard title of these remarks, Total Life is What We Need, comes from Clarence Major's 1967 manifesto on what the Black artist demands for Black people. He wrote, "Total life is what we want." I've transposed it into total life is what we need. That's how it became the mantra of the Darkroom Collective, a Black arts collective in Cambridge in the 1980s. These amazing, amazing writers, including Kevin Young, Natasha Trethway, Thomas Sayers Ellis, extraordinary people, came together in the morning celebration nexus at the memorial for James Baldwin at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. That is where they first met. As Thomas Sayers Ellis wrote, "Now he was gone, and we could never hear him speak his words in person, never have a conversation with him, never clasp his hand. He was our brilliant treasure. We had claimed him, and we wanted to pay our respects. The funeral was a literary event, like a reading or a book party. All our literary icons were there. Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Amiri Baraka eulogized Baldwin, and it was thrilling to hear Baraka describe Baldwin as, quote, God's own black mouth. Our sorrow was suffused with a kind of energy, a desire to make something positive out of loss, and so we resolved that we wouldn't let another of our literary elders get away from us." The dark room, the space, was literally a... Is that actually my phone? That is... There's another one.
It must be important.
No, throw it away.
Could be your son.
Okay, that is, no, it's not. It's not. Okay, back where we were. Back where we were. That was Dr. King. In keeping with my theme, I got a lot here for you. So the darkroom. The space that they lived in together was literally a photographic darkroom in a Victorian house in Central Square, shared with 6 art students. And words on that door, the darkroom, provided a pun on a room full of black books, black people, people who would be makers of black books, black gathering space, black creative space, a way to be embodied and in community as a mighty life force for self-care and survival. In keeping with the words of Langston Hughes, they believed that they should be free within themselves and that freedom must be seized every day. To tell you about another very, very important African-American collective, a black arts collective, I want to talk some about Cave Canem. But first, I need to tell you a little bit about being a black poet in the last 20 years of the 20th century without such community. There have been so many black writers' collectives over the years, but how to find your place is not always easy. I became a poet myself in the woodshed, outside of much community, and certainly outside of a community of African-American poetry peers. I came of age as a poet at a funny time in the culture, in the wake of the women's movement, as identity politics were starting to be named, celebrated, and then quickly derided. I'd belonged to some small women's writing groups, and I was part of rich communities of black people in the heady work of academia in the 1980s. But black poets of my generation were doing their work in diaspora. Those older than me, Rita Dove, Yusef Komunyakaa, and others, were working on their own and were usually the only ones in their teaching and poetry writing worlds. My path to poetry was first lit by a pen pal and someone who's very, very important here, the poet Michael Harper. As you know, of course, the late Michael Harper made his home here for many, many decades, mentored countless writers, scholars, thinkers. And I began writing him after hearing him read his work when I was 19 years old and in college. He kindly wrote me back. I wrote him a long, long letter where I said, you know, the poem that you read, so and so and so, I wonder, like, have you ever read Langston Hughes? Because, like, I don't know, I feel like I'm hearing Langston Hughes, on and on and on and on I went. So he was really kind to write me, back on, some of you know his little Ecru Brown University postcards, and he typed on them. I have hundreds of them. And I would chitter-chatter away, and he would write me back with his distilled koans of advice and ways of thinking about living in the world. Ashe, my beloved Michael Harper. And then after that, learning by pen pal, I was guided by one teacher at Boston University, Derek Walcott, who was interestingly suspicious of anything that might be called black identity, as well as suspicious of said community as being necessary for the nurturance of poems, though he himself was formed and continued to be nurtured by the Caribbean. From St. Lucia, lived and worked in Jamaica and in Trinidad before coming to the States. Walcott was generous about inviting students out to coffee and pubs and letting us be eavesdroppers and hangers-on to his soulful, robust friendships with Joseph Brodsky and Seamus Heaney. These men writing out of such distinct senses of place and approaches to the English language. I beheld their friendship and felt lucky to be near, quietly listening. I also learned from my year studying with Walcott that you cannot kill poets, which is to say, we come up between the cracks of cement in wild and unexpected colors, untended, nurtured on stony soil. We exist despite. No one can stop a poet who truly needs to be a poet. No one. This is true across time, this is true across censorship, this is true across imprisonment, because you can memorize them. This is true forever and ever and ever and ever. For a while, but not forever. Poets are the ones who make poems because they have to, and in spite of. Then something shifted for me in the wake of the death of the painter Romare Bearden. His work had been deeply meaningful to me my whole life, and I'd written poems in response to his work. I made a pilgrimage from Philadelphia, and here we have pilgrimage, black arts community again, to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine again. A grand service it was. I remember the vibrant Bearden works lining the walls of the cathedral, the Alvin Ailey dancer who offered a solo, the pianist Jackie McLean, the eulogies by Ralph Ellison, and my own beloved teacher and Bearden's great friend, Walcott. Afterwards, I went out to eat with Derek and a large group of Black visual and literary artists, all but Derek now gone. I was the youngest at the table, the proverbial jug with big ears, listening to the fabulous grown-ups tell stories and carry on, watching them drink their liquor and put hot sauce on their food. Everyone at the table was brilliant and Black. Everyone at the table was brilliant and Black and had made a commitment to a life in the arts. Everyone understood the one foot in front of the other aspects of making creative work, the discipline, the joy, the privilege, the struggle. That vibrant table of Black creative people telling stories and sharing precious bits of Black cultural history that would otherwise be lost was a dream come true for me, a responsibility. I had never been in such company with as clear a taste of my own life to come, a life I was committed to build. I wanted that world to be my home, but I knew I had to cultivate it, and I knew at the center of that vision were two pillars: unending discipline, which Black people know a great deal about, and the fertile soil of Black history and creativity as source and sustenance. So I tell you this story to say I became a poet before internet communities, still doing it with, the typing and retyping on the Underwood, the carbon paper fingerprint smudges, the SASEs, self-addressed stamped envelopes. You had to include one so that your poems would get returned to you and you'd know if they were going to be taken by the magazine or not. The trips to the post office, the occasional encouraging scribbled replies from editors while they rejected the poems, making the poems, sending them out, getting rejected, paying it no mind, sending it out again. All of this I did with no one to talk to, no peers, Black or white, really, in that moment, in that space. And it was a way that I wouldn't have traded because it cultivated artistic practice that can survive any snowstorm. But how did that becoming a poet, not quite as an autodidact, but certainly without the networks of community, relate to my involvement with the Cave Canem Poetry Workshop and this conversation about Black community? Over 20 years ago, Toy Darracott and Cornelius Eady had had one too many conversations with other Black poets who were weary of being the only one in poetry workshops, teaching as students. Inevitably, the Black poets kept finding when their poems were up for discussion, the conversation would turn to racial misunderstanding or get bogged down in the call to explain cultural references unknown to their white fellow poets. Neighborhood, hair, etc. Sometimes those exchanges were explosive. Lost were the poems themselves. What was in short supply is that very thing that poets seek in workshop, feedback to make the poem stronger. So the premise of Eady and Darracott was simple and elegant. It was time to create a community devoted to Black poets, which they began as a week-long summer workshop retreat with African American faculty and African American poets. They recruited teachers, myself included, the first year in June 1996 to the Mount St. Alphonsus Monastery in Esopus, New York, along the Hudson River. We came for free, happy to work in what has turned out to be one of the most vital American creative communities in the past several decades. I think that what we knew at Cave Canem is that sometimes simply bringing people together in light-handedly organized space is how you can find out what the organization ought to be. In other words, the work itself, the being together, is how you define your mission. We didn't do a whole lot of planning. We simply created the conditions for people to make art and be Black together, the space in which Black poets could see what emerged if they made the space safe. It is a particular form of genius that Toy and Cornelius understood that, without a community in which to nurture and make sense, the work can feel as though it's floating in outer space. Cave Canem has also consistently made room for highly divergent spokes of Black aesthetics and identity. The community's ethos is, to borrow Lucille Clifton's words, to live not in either or, but in and but. Not in either or, but in and but. All the prismatic faces of Blackness show themselves at different times and in different degrees. So the work itself evolves, one hopes, and gives us the radiant multivocal Black poetry in the new millennium that is defining excellence in American letters right now. If there were any secrets to the organization's success, and let me give you a couple of them because I think they're kind of useful principles with this sort of case study. One, do it for free. Though it's crucial that poets be paid for their labor, and that overworked people of color shouldn't be expected to do everything for free, On the other hand, sometimes doing it for free means that you move with the energy of the right idea and the faith that you can work out the details later. 2, to quote Hakeem Adabuti, run towards fear. By this I mean that a community which faces its divergences and interprets multivocality as a power source rather than Babel can build on that energy and move towards and through issues that otherwise divide us. On the Cave Canem listserv, debates, divergence, and drama occurs every single day, in addition to what happens in and out of workshop, these being fabulous, creative Black people after all. There have been times when we've needed to remind each other of our obligations to each other, but we have been courageous, I think, about having hard conversations and respecting our differences. 3, stay focused. Cave Canem supports Black poets, period. Success usually makes people want to do more. But Cave Canem is not branching out to include fiction writers nor poets of other backgrounds, though there have been all kinds of very rich partnerships with, for example, groups such as Kundiman, Asian American Writers Workshop, and so forth. But under the very simple rubric that Cave Canem has committed to are multitudes. Finally, poems come first, and poems are what last. And for a week in the workshop, there is no other purpose than making something that we can aspire to have last. So though Cave Canem was not a part of my formative years as a poet, it has been a sustaining force in my life as a poet somewhere, hopefully in mid-stride. For teachers and poets already published, having a sense that there is a community that we belong to, that is paying some attention to our work, an example that is listening, that the pond of brilliance is being continually replenished, is an energizing force. Seeing the radicalizing power of art with my students, finding words for their campus revolutions in poetry, shows me that what these poets in community have made is something that says your demands are material and spiritual simultaneously. And as art feeds the spirit, art also guides us. One needs a teller in a time like this. I turn, as I often do, to the words of my touchstone poet, Gwendolyn Brooks. She wrote from Chicago's South Side across the 20th century, born in Kansas, raised in Chicago's Black Belt, a very specific locale, an urban village, a place in 10 square blocks. She lived in a 10 square block radius for her whole long life. She was fed by the place and the people she came from. So many of us move and migrate. Her people were post-migration, post-double migration, if you will, migrants from the U.S. South, the biggest human movement, of course, the Great Migration in the history of the Western Hemisphere. So in her and of course the displacement of the Middle Passage before that. So in her very specific place, she brought her people with her. She brought their history, she brought their recombinant language, she brought their culture in a new place with new constraints, as those Southern migrants brought what they had had in that previous Great Migration from West Africa to the United States some generations before. And you too, I see, coming together on campuses in all the power of your diversity to make the world anew in combination. Makers, tellers, whether we are looking to the work of filmmakers, painters, potters, installation artists, dancers, poets, when we turn to culture as our history and to guide us, we're turning to the work of human beings, souls, who are tellers, who know how to look around and look within and share it with us from odd angles, illuminate us. A life committed to looking and looking further and then telling is a courageous life, I think. That is the magic, the unique power of art. In Brooks is a sense of place, but place that carries history. Poetry is ancient. Poetry is the way people have carried their songs forward across culture and across time, saying, this is who we are, this is where and what we come from. This human will moves across culture, it moves across time. I believe that the will to song is even physical, biological, for who can imagine a child that does not sing, that does not have the urge to tell a story, or who does not sit riveted in the presence of one. Brooks also wrote, "The time cracks into furious flower, shows its head all unashamed and sways in wicked grace." Here again, the time. What time are we in right now? What time is it right now on the globe? We are in the time of Trayvon. That's one thing we could call it, a time in which unmediated and unfiltered young people are seeing their peers murdered, and we adults are seeing our children trying to figure out how we can protect and guide you. So when I see student protests close with ecstatic dance in the face of their peers being murdered, people who walk the earth in their young, dark bodies, like the majority of the people on the planet walk the earth in young, dark bodies, I feel there is something indelible and powerful and cultural and historical that is standing up to power. Again, Toni Morrison, and this is from Beloved. And this is the sermon in the clearing, which you may remember. Here she said, "In this here place we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet and in grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh. They despise it, no more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them, pat them together, stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. This is flesh I'm talking about here, flesh that needs to be loved. And oh, my people out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck unnoosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it, grace it, stroke it, and hold it up. Remember, wrote Ntozake Shange, we were not meant to survive. And yet we are the product of people who survived, who were not meant to flourish except for the profit of others. But here you are, and yes, we did. So you know that not only do you carry with you the hopes and dreams of a generation, but you carry the power and fortitude of those generations. Even now, with the challenges of the moment, think of what our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have lived through, and the common saying rings awfully true that they didn't make the sacrifices they made in order for us to fall apart and not continue walking the jagged path forward. 3, none lonely, none hunted. I was married to an artist, the late Fikre Gebreyesus, and had the privilege of watching him invent things all day long. In his studio, bottle caps, bags and bags of coconut shells, trash bags. He'd buy paints, yes, but he'd also mix a pigment from anything. He was also a chef, so he'd make a paste from turmeric, Arab tree and berbere, sun-dried peppers ground to red dust, ochre curry powder, green from backyard leaves found in the Elm City that he'd pulverize and calibrate. And what happened, he would wonder, if you rubbed coffee grounds on canvas? What happened if you remembered the colors of a childhood that war, he grew up in Eritrea, attempted to destroy, but that existed in reconstructed memory that was not mere nostalgia, but rather the seeds of a vision? With those coconut shells, he planned to build a Russian issue helicopter because the Russians provided arms to Ethiopia in the war against Ethiopia and Eritrea, and that was an icon from his childhood. But he first had to figure out how to make the helicopter fly, and then how to make it crash. That reminds me of Pedro Reyes's powerful work where he melts down confiscated weapons and refashions them into shovels to plant trees, something that has no earthly purpose, but to take away life, the gun transformed into something that performs a life-giving function. Fikre grew up in East Africa during the long Eritrean independence struggle, and somehow in the midst of war and death squads and soldiers in his home and disappeared classmates, he made beauty, first visioned within the walls of his family's home. I want to say to you, and this is a sort of a linchpin to everything I'm saying, that in the midst of a global refugee crisis, when he had to leave at 16, he walked from Eritrea to Sudan, and then Italy, and then Germany as a refugee. He came then to the United States. His vision, his resistance, his solution was art that he made and art that he taught children when he returned to teach in a makeshift mountain school in an air raid zone in Eritrea. So I ask you, what does freedom look like? What is the interior space of joy seized in the midst of struggle? How do the sounds of diaspora make their way into the visual landscape? And how do those sounds represent the connection of people around the globe, cultural continuity, the indelible, that which survived slave trades and refugee crises? How do we think about what Robin Kelley calls freedom dreams? How did Ficre vision all day long and put on canvas what was in the space of his head? Here's what artists do. Artists make radical solutions all day long. We create. We see and we try and we discard and we see again. We vision, we discard, we invent. We do it in the dark. We bring it into community. I wish for all of you still studying work that matters and work that you love, and there are so many ways to think about how we can be useful with our labor and how we can turn our physical and intellectual energy toward other human beings, to let our own hard-won excellence serve more than paying the bills and material pleasures. The struggle to do good work and to better ourselves in our work is truly a noble one. And so at the end of the day, I think what is always true is truer, and something I remind myself of especially right now. The work itself is the only antidote to the things that make it hard to do the work. And so the lessons of the elders that I grew up with, that many of you grew up with, that make our way to us through our families, this cross-temporal community, but also through the study and the example of art, through chance encounters with wise strangers, is that it is a gift to love the work that you do. And so for me, the honor of doing the work that I love is what I bring to you tonight. Poets are trying to use words in ways that are visceral, physical, that remind us in the best of poems that they are products of the human body. They emanate from bodies. They exist in part for the same reasons poems first existed, that people want to tell their stories to each other, that the tribe needs to chronicle itself and thus yields to make song. And what I think that poetry here, as we talk about it today, helps us think about, helps us envision, helps us put to words, ever more urgent now, is not just about the question of liberation, but what is freedom? What does freedom look like? I turn always to Robert Hayden, his great, great, great sonnet, Frederick Douglass. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth. When it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally one, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians. This man, this Douglass, this slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, none alien. This man, superb and logic, in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues' rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing. That's Frederick Douglass by Robert Hayden, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, none alien, is one way of defining freedom. And so to conclude, into a light both brilliant and unseen. And let me show you what you've been looking at is a painting by Charles Alston called Walking. And what you're gonna look at is a bust of Martin Luther King Jr. by Charles Alston also. So this is the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. that presides over the Oval Office since President Obama brought it into the Oval Office in 2009, the first image representation of a black person ever to be publicly displayed at the White House, ever in history. And you may have heard of it in the last few days when it was not visible in a recent Oval Office picture. A journal speculated that Trump had had it removed, and this was a mistake. And Trump responded ad nauseum that that was fake news designed to make him look like he didn't have favorable attitudes toward black people. He mentioned it again yesterday in his characteristically rambling and combative putative Black History Month speech as a point of argumentation. Stephen Colbert, among others, has speculated that perhaps the statue is at this moment trying to run away from the Oval Office. And I myself have been thinking about how, but they'd shoot me so dead, how to go in and get it and take it out. So they say, come with me. So in the context for today, I want to, as a sort of a final example of something, I want to right-size this conversation because in the days, weeks, months ahead, we will be very, very easily distracted. And I want people of good intent and goodwill with commitment to community, with commitment to each other's lives, to stay the course with the work that we are doing, to do what we know how to do well, to stay committed to our communities, and to right-size the noise, or else it will grind us to nothing. I promise you that will happen. You will witness spectacular burnouts by very, very good people in the coming times. And some of that will be by the irresistible urge to respond. So how do we right-size it? Well, the way that I right-size it for today's context, this bust of Martin Luther King, is to talk about the thing itself. The thing itself is a sculpture that was created by commission by the artist Charles Alston. And you've been looking before at his painting, Walking. This bust was created, the King bust was created in 1970. Alston died in 1977. He was an artist who was active from the Harlem Renaissance forward, first black instructor at the Art Students League, someone who formed the Spiral Arts Collective, the 409 Group Arts Collectives in Harlem, where he worked out of his whole life after coming to New York City from North Carolina. And then on commission, the work, so this is 1958. The marching, and it was after the march, the Birmingham bus boycott, and 1970 was the bust, and he died in 1977. So these works have meaning for us for today. Both of them works across 15 years, inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King, and they have very, very, very special meaning to me because Alston was my great uncle. And when I was a child and that bust was completed, it lived first in what was then the Museum of African Art in the small Frederick Douglass House on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. This bust, made, as I said, on commission in the short years following the national trauma of the King assassination, was a point of tremendous pride for Alston. He was known to all as Spinky. And when I was a little girl, he took me to the Frederick Douglass House to see that bust. My mother remembers him making it in his Harlem studio, and it was one of the last work that he made before he died. If we go back to his King, we see that it is not smooth and shiny. Think of those wonderful words in Haydn. We don't remember our great people with bronze and wreaths alone. We don't remember them with statues and rhetoric, but with the lives grown out of their life. So this King is not smooth and shiny and triumphal, but rather textured, weathered, complex. He's made of bronze, yes, to suggest brown African-American skin, but also with an otherworldly luster. The bust is lifelike and representational, but we're also with that sheen, seeing someone from across the veil. And so Alston's King is both grounded and otherworldly, earthly and mythical. The bust is life-size, unlike the peculiar concrete behemoth looming over the mall, if any of you have ever seen that. That's weird, that King sculpture. You can look in King's eyes and talk to him. You can imagine the great oratory of the 20th century coming forth from his mouth, but more importantly, you can imagine him formulating those ideas in the pensive stance that we see here. He inspires both at the intimate level and at the grand scale. Because it is actually a great work of art, it lives, which is to say, it seems not to be the same when you look at it and look at it again and then look at it again. I feel certain that President Obama meditated on the difficult questions of the day by summoning forth the life force of Dr. King's legacy, ancestral and present, by looking at that statue that he brought into the Oval Office to be with Abraham Lincoln, replacing the bust of Winston Churchill as his two touchstones for his 8 years as president. Turning back to Walking. The movement, the bus boycott, birthed a painting. The movement birthed a great deal of art. The painting then birthed a poem called Walking, and I'm going to close with that. It's a poem that I wrote. And I ask you the question, what will you feel, think, plan, do, individually and together, with these manifestations of Dr. King's legacy in front of you, with the example that he's left us of his deeds and his words and the art and the life that is grown out of his life, to go back to that Hayden, fleshing the dream of the beautiful, needful thing. How will you struggle with each other in love and in community? There is always light ahead, and you all will show us what it illuminates. And so to close, this short poem that emerges from this painting, Walking. You tell me knees are important. You kiss your elders' knees in utmost reverence. The knees in the painting are what send the people forward, on to a new place, moving as one. Once progress felt real and inevitable, as sure as the taste of licorice or lemons. The painting was made after marching in Birmingham, walking into a light both brilliant and unseen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for taking in a lot of rich, dense ideas, which I've been very happy to share with you, and I'm eager to know what you're thinking and wondering. Yes?
Do you have a mindfulness practice or religious practice that enriches your life?
I'll answer. Why do you ask? I will answer you. I'm curious as to why you ask.
Why do I ask?
Uh-huh.
Because it's been one of my interests since I was 18 years old.
Yeah. No, I'm a yogi.
I do a little Tai Chi and a little Zen.
I think yoga is a great thing for mind and body and making stillness and time. You know, my late husband brought me to yoga, and he early in the Obama presidency, he was an artist, very rich dreamer, and he woke up and he said, "I had the most amazing dream last night." He said, "President Obama was in downward facing dog, and then he turned his head to the camera and he said, 'You all need to chill out.'" So everyone should be a yogi. Actually, the world would be a different place. Truly, I actually mean that. Thanks for asking.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in these, there's no question. The question is, why did they find it so much sooner than we did?
Why did
the East, why did the yogis in Hinduism and the Buddhists with sitting meditation and the Taoists with Tai Chi find it, that kind of practice, so much earlier than we did?
Well, it depends on who your we is, right? It depends on who your we is and how you measure the backness.
For me, the we is Northern European, so maybe.
Not me. You know, I think that just, you know, we have so much to learn from ancient traditions that rooted in place. So thank you. Yes, question back here.
Thank you very much. I remember watching your poem during Obama's first inauguration, and I've kept it with me for the rest of the terms. As we move into this new administration, is there a poem or poetry that you would recommend us as we go through this single term to carry with us?
Well, I think that, you know, here's what I really believe the practice of reading poetry does. It arrests the moment, it slows down. Poetry is something that you return to and contemplate anew, so it encourages a kind of a thoughtfulness. It can also be consumed with speed. The poet Wanda Coleman said, you know, poetry is a poor people's art form because a writer can write it online, it can be memorized, it is portable, it is a way that human beings who make poems offer not only their selves to another, so I may write a poem that's in the first person and offer it, but my first person self is a self, or at least as I believe in this talk, that calls forward a whole lot of historical selves. So the exchange of poems, especially cross-culturally or cross-experientially, is a very condensed way of human beings coming a bit closer soul to soul. I think that also it supports a very unmonetized economy. I mean, well, you can read, most of the way that we read poetry is you read it for free. But if you buy books of poetry, I know I always entreat audiences, you say, you know, when Christmas comes, if, you know, a $10 poetry book is the gift that you give to everyone, that actually profoundly changes the poetry economy, and just offers support to people who, you know, I feel so fortunate beyond measure that it is something that I do, but it is work in the dark. And I think with all artists, we say, go into that deep chasm, you know, do what the great Adrienne Rich said, you know, diving into the wreck. She says, I want the wreck itself and not the story of the wreck. Got to go there and see that thing. So that sort of spirit work, psychic work, you know, that particular labor is then offered up for the rest of us. So I think that just reading poetry is a useful thing, along with many, many other things in response to what's going on now. But you asked about poetry, yeah.
I was just wondering if there was a specific poet that you think might be of particular inspiration.
I could name you dozens, and let's start with Rich. You know, her collected poems just came out this year, and I think that she's someone who really, really brilliantly exemplified an activist life in exquisite verse and essays and action. A very, very integrated approach to what it means to be an artist of the world. But I would really, you know, to say one is, I give you that, but I'm not going to answer that, because really it's the practice of reading widely, because it's different voices, and there's no one voice that has all that we need. Yeah. Yes, Professor.
Thanks for this, that really, you know, informative and moving talk. I had a question about your references to the Darkroom Collective.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a really intriguing narrative that you saw around these two institutions. And it struck me that, you know, part of what's sort of distinctive about those institutions is that they really have this sort of tangential relationship to the academic institutions of the liberal academy, right? They're sort of connected to them, but not sort of like fully within them. And it seems to me that that's a really different kind of institutional formation that these arts collectives have than for a lot of other literary artists, right? If you say, think about, you know, like the Mark McGurl kind of narrative of post-World War II American fiction writing. It's a story about how fiction gets incorporated into the liberal institution fully, right, as the dominant mode of literary production. So I was curious to hear you talk about like why you think it is that like for Black poets these kind of institutions that are not sort of fully incorporated right into the institution have become some of the most sort of like fruitful production for the poet. Is there something about poetry that leads to a different kind of relationship to the institution? You have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. The first piece of the answer is because we have not been fully integrated into the institution, right? I mean, much has changed, and I'm going to point to that in the you know, in the years the 25 years that I've been teaching. There are many more Black poets who are teaching in universities and who have that academic perch or authority, or you know, what can come along with it, and also just that day job, right, at a certain level. But we have not been in this space. you know, in my lifetime, right? We have not been in this space. And I want to talk about Michael Harper for a minute, because the work that Michael Harper did as the very, very, very rare person, as the only black poet in an Ivy League school, in any of the Ivy League schools, for most of his career. And if you look at, for example, Robert Hayden's papers at the Baha'i Temple in Illinois, you'll see Harper working behind the scenes to get him an honorary degree here, and Harper working to get, and also Connecticut College, I think, and Harper working to get Sterling Brown an honorary degree here, and Harper working to get Sterling Brown's collected poems the National Book Award so that they would be into print, because his work had been out of print for 30 years. So it's that kind of like labor of love and work in extended community and quiet generosity by, you know, a very wonderful, very gruff man, as Michael was, but he was always thinking about the accident, the lucky accident of his having access to some resources at a particular moment in time, and that his work made no sense without the elevation of a Hayden and a Brown, for example. He would tell over and over again the story of Gwendolyn Brooks when she was a judge on I think it was the National Book Award, and Harper was a finalist but didn't win. And Brooks wrote him and said, "But you were my first choice." And that meant more to him than the prize, but more importantly, that's actually a very important story about literary history, and that, you know, prizes and, you know, it's not everything. But when you think about the concerted efforts of a Harper and those of us who watched him very closely and tried to do what he did as far as, you know, getting on these kinds of committees and in these places and, you know, writing the 900th letter when you're too tired to write the letter because maybe you know, it's sort of a sense of duty and maybe you can, you know, and so things have changed. So that's an important thing to say about what does it mean to be integrated into the academy. Also, poets don't integrate very well anyway. I mean, you know, because there's something very fundamentally and beautifully idiosyncratic about poetry in particular ways that we could talk about for a long time. So I think that to the institutional proximity of Cave Canem, but not inness of Cave Canem and of the Darkroom Collective, the Darkroom Collective had, it was in Cambridge, but it was in, you know, Central Square, not Harvard Square, and, you know, people who had dropped out of school and people who were in various stages. Cave Canem, the first class, as it were, you know, had people aged 19 to 82 at various different forms in life. You know, a couple years later, there was someone who was, you know, had been recently incarcerated who came and joined. You know, there was always a sense that our community was our community. It was many things, and that if the poems were all academically tied, though we were always proud of everybody, we felt, you know, I think there was always a collective sense if someone got a job in the academy, it's like, you go, you got that job. You know, you got that job, and we know that that was hard, but now do something with that job. You know, because you're a proxy for others. You know, it's like, you know, the great Shange kind of story poem I was thinking about the other day, the one, you know, "Oh baby, you so pretty." Do you know that "Oh baby, you so pretty"? It's Entasaki Shange, and it's about a black woman, and she's walking down the street, and she's looking good, and everyone's like, "Oh baby, you so pretty. Oh baby, you so pretty. Baby, you so pretty." And then finally she turns and says, "There are millions of us." So by proxy, right? You know, oh, you got that job? There are millions of us. And it's not a good feeling to feel like you're all special because you're the one in that space, and that's what I admired so much about Michael. All of his brilliance, you know, all of his brusqueness, and all of his generosity. Yeah, so thanks for that question. Yes?
First of all, thank you. I'm a first-year student here from Birmingham, Alabama, so seeing people like you is very, very inspiring. But my question was, you used the term right-sizing, and I was just unsure what exactly you meant by that. So.
Thank you for asking that. And you know, it's so interesting you should ask that, because I work at the Ford Foundation now, and I never knew that phrase nor used it until I started working there, and I learned all of this philanthropic corporate vocabulary. So you see, you've got a very good ear. I'm serious, actually, because you called that out not only, so like lesson, you know, 18-year-old number one, fantastic. If you don't know something, ask a question. Someone else has that question. Thank you for exemplifying that. But also something in your ear not only knew that you didn't know what that phrase was, but maybe it even, some part of you didn't sound like my language to you, or it stood out in some kind of way. And maybe in another editorial pass, I actually probably would have taken it out because it's new language. So you did good. But what it literally means is bringing something into the right proportion. So, or what I think is the right proportion. So what in the Trump context, it was about, every day there's so much noise, but how do we take our energy and response and right size, we don't give that all of our energy. We have to think about what we're saying yes to. We have to think about, getting the right size of our productive energy and putting it in a productive place, which is not to say don't be a warrior, but it's just to say we have to constantly calibrate. And I think that's going to be very important moving forward, because every day it's a new cast of characters, and every day it's a new circus, and every day it's, new things that I certainly did not imagine we were in the midst of. So there's a lot to process. Thank you so much for that question. Anyone else? Yes. Yes, you.
Earlier on, you gave a really good way of presenting historical moments and how they impact the artist. And I think your line was the imperative of ancestry. And I'm really curious about how legacy impacts an artist, because you can have the impact of your art affect people today, but are you thinking about what it'll have 30 years from now, the impact it will have 30 years from now or further on?
So I myself, what I try to think about when I'm making a poem is how to make a durable poem unto itself. I don't think I would get very distracted, and also, I would feel for a moment grandiose and then very small if I thought about the legacy. So rather I think literally, what am I making? That's why I love the term woodshed, which, it comes from jazz musicians, of course, but what I like about it and thinking about it with poems is to go and make something, a well-made thing, according to aesthetic principles that we learn and we're trying to experiment with and we're trying to work out and maybe do something a little different. And then poem by poem, one by one, day by day, you kind of humbly put them forward, but then what happens with it is something else altogether. Because I also have always been a scholar, it gives me great joy to bring forward and illuminate other people's creative work and to say why, the really important work of the 80s and changing canons and bringing new terms and new ways of defining excellence and saying what is excellence in canons where we've been kept out. That work is so very, very important, because again, what does someone getting, a Pulitzer Prize today mean if, Robert Hayden and Langston Hughes and Amiri Baraka and Lucille Clifton and on never got a Pulitzer Prize? So, it's sort of context and also the humble offering of hopefully a well-made thing. Yeah. Okay, one more question. Yes?
So thank you. It's a beautiful talk. I was thinking about the three key poles that you hit between love and justice and freedom at the end. And implying a kind of note of hope, but also this undercurrent that we talk about isolation and loneliness. Right? And wondering if really the message of hope that you carry, the message of love and justice and freedom, is one of a company, of being a companion to those who feel that isolation, particularly in this moment, right? Because of the kind of destabilization that's going on. Like to right size is to not really understand what the alignment should be, like where love is, where freedom is, where justice is. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing you said. So you say more, or even what's the question?
I'm sensing the anxiety in the culture is a sense of isolation, a sense of wow, this kind of instability where people are feeling like I don't know who's with me, right? And even in the midst of a million plus women's march, even it's like where do we go? Who's going to be with me as a warrior or not? Right? And the telling your own story about not having a community, not having not being quite sure who's with you, right? But knowing, having a certain kind of faith in oneself, right, to carry you through.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. You know, in that time that I didn't have poetry community, I did have other communities. But I think also, you know, another way for an artist to think about isolation, and not just for an artist, but, you know, there is, if you're going to get very, very good at something, good enough to be useful, good enough to be helpful, there is a lot of solitary time, you know? I mean, there is, you know, just hour after hour after hour after hour to get good enough to be a useful creature, right? So, I mean, I think that that is also a part of the human condition, perhaps, is that, you know, we kind of come in and out of self and community, in and out of self and community. So maybe that's, you know, that's part of what's under there as well. But I think that, you know, the profound joy, and I guess maybe this is what I would say, especially to the students, the profound joy of the hard work and struggle of working things through in community is, there is nothing, you know, my children aside, more sustaining to me in my life and more fortunate to me in my life, you know? So, you know, that's kind of, you know, a circuitous exchange. Yeah, thank you. So thank you all so much. Thank you.